All right. Good afternoon, guys, on the East Coast. Good afternoon also to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, host and co creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. If you had a chance to take a look at our prior posts or our promos, if you will, you'll see that we do have a terrific guest for you this afternoon. So give me one moment while I introduce them. The guests that I want to introduce, they are a composer in the world of film, television, as well as video games. They've won BMI Award. They are Emmy nominated composer. They've worked on a slew of films, whether it is just Jason Bourne, The Nice Guys, The Town, Good Wife, American Hustle, Batman, Arkham Knight, just to name a few. Of course, they're far more than that. So without further ado, I want to introduce David Buckley. Give me 1 second while I bring him on. Hey, David, how you doing?
Good, thanks, Brandon. How are you?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So first and foremost, thanks so much for coming on. And actually, I didn't even preface it with this, but the point of today's conversation is to not only talk about your body of work thus far, but also to discuss the upcoming project that you provided the music for, which is Nobody. But before we kick into that, I wanted to think back earlier within your career and how it basically kicked off. And I understand it's a pretty fascinating story of how it all got started. Because from what I understand, I guess you started as a choir boy.
That's right. Yeah, I mean it's not an obvious progression, really. I can't. You wouldn't really have said, that the journey from A to B. I wouldn't really say was predictable in my case. But when I was a kid, I sang in a cathedral choir in England, and we had to do the. You can imagine us wearing our little cloaks, and we go into this very old building. I think the foundation of the cathedral, I think, was 8th century, so it's been around for 1,200 years. And I'd sing these services day in and day out, and it was just sort of like a somebody who plays football would train every day. This was just like you got into a rhythm, you got into a cycle, and it was very demanding. It was, we sang on Christmas Day. All the other kids would go home, but we'd sing on Christmas. We'd sing the day after Christmas. So it really was like being a sort of in a band, but at a very sort of young age, and the pay was pretty bad as well. But we did get paid, but it was pretty bad. But out of the blue, all of a sudden, we got a call saying that is the choir available to sing on the soundtrack to The Last Temptation of Christ, the Martin Scorsese film. Peter Gabriel scored it, and I think at the time I probably didn't know who Scorsese was or who Peter Gabriel was. I don't know why I would have done, but I was only 9 at the time. But we sang on this thing, and I think my eyes just opened. I mean, I just thought, wow, this is music which I'm involved in, being added to a film with actors and cameras, and this is a young mind trying to sort of understand how all these things, why did it all fit together? What was this all about? And I don't really think I necessarily knew any answers. And I don't necessarily think there and then I said that's what I want to do, but I do think that a seed was planted. I think there was. I think almost certainly, looking back on it, that's sort of when the fire was lit. It was a tiny little fire, but I think that's where the sort of ignition happened. And yeah, I mean, there's obviously a journey between there and now, which I can bore you as much or as little as you like. But effectively, I think another interesting part of my time in that choir, again, an unexpected turn of events, was that while I was singing there was a sort of, he almost came in and out like a gust of wind. He wasn't there very long, but so a certain guy called Harry Gregson Williams, who's an A-list composer. He's done all the Shrek movies, Tony Scott's movies until he died.
Yep.
He's just done Mulan. He doesn't need any introduction. But he was teaching in Egypt at the time, so he was in his early 20s. He was teaching in Egypt. He came via where I was singing, and we did. You know, he was effectively an adult, and I was effectively a boy. So there wasn't really like, we weren't friends or anything, but we were acquaintances. But because of that, a couple of decades afterwards, I sort of got back in touch with him by sort of mutual friends. And he invited me to come out to Los Angeles and said, I'm working on a load of stuff. Would you be interested in helping out? And I said, I'm at the airport. Just I'll see you in 10 hours. So yeah, it's really weird that this little quaint place in the West Country in England that probably no one's ever heard of. It had this. It was all the beginning stories. It was the origin story for me in terms of film scoring. So it's quite nice. And just to round out that particular point, there was a film that I had out. I'd sort of been coming out at different times. I can't quite keep up with it because of the pandemic. Called Greenland with Gerald Butler, and I actually went back to my old choir and recorded the same choir that I sang in 30 years ago. I actually recorded them for my score for this movie, which is it's quite nice to go full circle and go back to where it all started.
Absolutely. And just as I was commenting on at the top and providing the introduction of everything that you've done, as I say, you've done film, you've done television, you've done video games. So I have to ask, it's always fascinating to know when I'm talking to various artists about various mediums that they have an opportunity to step into, is that approach the same in terms of how you would approach a given project, or based on the medium, would you say it varies a bit?
I think that you go into any of these things as the same. I don't think there's a sort of rack of hats, and you think, I'm working on a TV show, I better put that hat on, or I'm working on a video game. Right? I think you go in essentially, with the same kind of mannerisms, everything that you the very reason that you want to write music, and that you do get asked to write music for these different kind of media. I think you sort of go through the door roughly feeling like you're equipped with the same tools as always. But there are practical things, obviously, that make each of those three areas different. I've actually also, way back in the early days, did a lot of commercials and jingles and stuff like that, which is its own thing as well. But with TV, film and video games, it's. I mean, I can't. Yeah, obviously I can't speak for anyone. I was going to speak for myself, really. But I still think everything that if you can write as you want to write, which you can't always. Sometimes you're handcuffed and you have to sort of go in a certain direction, just in order to keep everyone happy. But certainly, if I'm able to write what I, would like to write, then I've got all my sort of musical things festering, bubbling away inside me, and my hope is that any project will allow those things to come out. But as I was saying, there's practicalities. Video games, those schedules are really, really long, like over a year. Certainly for the couple I've done, I mean, really long schedules. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you've got TV.
That's what I was going to hop in on, is just that idea of, just like you were saying, a lot of people that are not, behind the scenes or not familiar with that process of each medium is so different in terms of how it's executed, and just as you said, the length of time. So I guess that would be the more, specific question in terms of that approach of dealing with, I guess, with television, you have episodes, and you have an arc over a season. With film, you just have a finite time, and games are, I would say, closer maybe to TV in terms of the breadth of time of working on it.
Well, yes, and of course it depends what type of TV show you do. I mean, I've done The Good Wife was network television, and when I first started that, we were doing 23 episodes a season, and that was, 1 week, start it, finish it, the next week, get on to the next one. I mean, that's a sort of, so effectively it feels like it's a, 3/4 of a year of work, but each one feels like a little, here's another section, and each one feels like a little death. You get to the end, you go breathe a sigh of relief, and then it's on to the next, but video games, in some ways, I think, in some ways they're similar, also in some ways they're different, because to get from the beginning to the end really does take that full year, or God, I mean, the development of a video game can be, I'm sure, well, I know it's much longer than that. It can be 3 or 4 years, and longer. The tricky thing for composing, when you've got that, when you're being fed information in sort of small bits over a year or more, is that you never really get the full picture. Even with a film, when you start a film, you don't necessarily get the final cut. You almost certainly don't get the final cut. You're going to get work in progress. It's going to have a lot of good stuff in there. It's going to be the edits. They've made a good pass at the edit. It's probably the director's cut,
but not the actual cut. Yeah,
start working on, and then they go into. It won't be the theatrical cut, and there'll be still at that. When you see the director's cut, there's this whole process of producers commenting and their notes coming in the studio, and then they test. You go out and play it in a cinema, and you get an audience reaction. And I mean, some films, I could think of some films where that's created a hell of a long process as well. But at least as a composer, you're looking at it. At least you're looking at a sort of overview of everything. Sure, this bit may go, this bit may get shorter. They may reshoot this bit. They may cut this character out completely. They may make this bit of music that you wrote and it was absolutely perfect. They may suddenly make it double the length or half the length. And that's a pain in the ass, but you can, that's part of the job. I think with the video game world, it takes a sort of certain imagination to sort of really understand it. Because if you've just only seen, 10 minutes and then you don't see another 10 minutes for another 3 months of the game, it means that you have to do a lot of kind of mapping in your mind as to how this all fits together. And of course, with video games, I mean, I'm not a gamer, so I'm not going to speak with any authority on this, but it's an obvious point that it's not a linear process, that, depending on the choices you make, you can go that way, this way, or the other way, which, I think it's a challenge. And I think that's probably why, there are a lot of dedicated video game composers who probably really understand the nuances of that. And also, as well, just, the delivery. I mean, one technical point, I mean, certainly on the Batman game, I had, one of the tasks I had was when I was writing the cues, the music, was to think of it in layers of intensity, so that that you've got a piece of music that can play if you're at this part of the level, but you need to have a second layer and a third layer and fourth layer that all work together. That the sort of the further the player is getting into the game, to the scene, whatever, that the music is escalating with.
I was going to say the encounter with the boss, it intensifies as you get to the end of that level, and that encounter that you have with that end level boss.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the world of sort of garage band and stuff like that, one might think it's easy. Oh yeah, just click on a button and you can get more. But obviously, my job's actually to compose those different elements, and they've got to work. The small one, the basic one, before you get to the boss fight, has got to sound like a piece of music. Can't just sound like, oh, that sounds a bit kind of, doesn't sound like anything. It's got to sound like it's legit, and then you're building on top of that. So that's an interesting exercise which you don't find in when you're scoring film and television. But I think, broadly speaking, though, I still think whatever attitude compositionally that I have, whatever tickles my ear and that makes me feel inspired as a composer. I think I would bring that to anything. But if someone said write a ballet or write a symphony or write a pop song or whatever, I mean, I still think it's still essentially me, but you just have to slightly sort of navigate your way into the requirement, the specifics of the medium. And also, television, I think, is the most brutal in terms of, as I was saying, you finish an episode and it's like, oh God, now I've got to start again. I mean, I think there, you really have to trust your gut. There is very little time to sort of think, oh, I just watched this episode and, I think I'm going to go and walk up a mountain and sip tea and do yoga. I mean, you've kind of got to watch it and you've got to start writing some music and you've got to hope to God that music's not necessarily perfect the first time, but at least enough for them to say, okay, yeah, good. Can you do this? Can you do that? But if you're sort of floundering there and it's like, no, that doesn't work. I mean, if you get that 2 or 3 times, then it's trouble in television. So it tests a different set of muscles. And in many ways, for me, a movie is almost the perfect workout in terms of sort of muscular activity, that there's enough time to kind of try a little thing here, try a little thing there. If they don't like it, you can say, it's okay, we still got time. There's still the finishing line is still feels reasonably comfortable. I enjoy all the disciplines, but I just think, probably because I started doing films first, that space of time is the one that feels comfortable isn't the word, but sort of the most. I feel that I can approach it with sort of more confidence than anything. I think everything else, TV is just a little bit. You're on the edge of your seat, basically.
Awesome. All right. So I know we were talking about, your body of work this far, but I want to be able to hop into reason why we are here. We got to talk nobody. So, tell me about how your involvement, with this film came about.
Sure. I'm having a sip of beer here, but I just point out I'm in Europe at the moment, so it's just less than anyone think I drink in the middle of the afternoon.
Yes.
It's 10 o'clock at night, so I think I'm okay. Nobody. It was a film that was my agent had mentioned it to me a couple of times, and it's a Universal film, and I've done a few projects at Universal, and so it was a sort of put my name in a hat kind of thing and talk to the director. Now this was, let's see, how long ago was this? This was probably about 13. It was December before last, so December 2019. Myself, along with, I'm sure, a few other people, got on the phone to Ilya, the director, and we had a chat, and I think, we got on well. I think, we enjoyed talking to each other. I had read the script at this point. It hadn't been shot, the movie, so I'd read the script, and, we discussed, musical thoughts based on the script, which is always a bit of a, it's interesting what one discusses concerning a script and then how much of that is actually relevant when you actually see the movie. But anyway, it was good. It was a good, it was a means by which we could sort of begin a process of communication. Then you play the waiting game, and then I was told I got the job. Then I had to go and shoot the film, which they did at the very beginning of last year. And then, I guess just before the sort of realities of the pandemic set in, I went to Canada where they were editing it, and I hung out there, watched a movie with the editor and the director, and we kind of went through what the musical needs were, what we thought the musical needs were, and then it goes through that process that I was just describing it goes through the process of what I was describing, plus it went through the process of having a global pandemic put in place, which did change things. There's no question about it. It made, a lot of my sort of, one thing that we always discussed for the movie is that this didn't seem like it needed to be an orchestral score. This was before, COVID had become a big problem over in the West. So there was never a suggestion that this was all about symphony orchestra. You know, I've written for orchestra, I've written for solo instruments, I've written for electronic stuff. You know, so I never assume that a project that I'm hired for is going to require always this or always that or always the other. I mean, that's always a starting point that you talk about, the director. And Ilya and I realized that this, you know, one thing, there's quite a lot of songs in the movie. Like, you know, classic songs. We felt, you know, so the question was, what does the score do that kind of doesn't feel like it's like so different to the songs, but also doesn't feel like it's competing with the songs or like sounding like sort of bad songs or something like that. So we realized that it wasn't, what was going to help us was that we don't need to worry about the orchestra. And it turned out that that was a blessing because, you know, at the time, it would have been
nightmares.
We were trying to piece it all together, sort of April. It would have been a nightmare. I don't know. I mean, I think at the time, literally, we were in lockdown. I mean, now people are recording, and I mean, you know, things are possible, albeit with a lot of, you know, red tape and complications. But yeah, it would have been very difficult. But you know, what was amazing about this experience for me was that we knew what we didn't want orchestra. So what do you want? Well, I wanted guitars, I wanted drums, I wanted bass, I wanted organs, keyboards, some stuff, you know, computer stuff, synths and stuff like that, some bowed instruments. And so, I mean, obviously I'm doing a lot of programming in my studio here, but also I would send stuff off to, you know, almost it felt like this sort of global band of, you know, my guitarist was in Tasmania. I had this guy who plays a bowed instrument in Turkey. You know, I would send, you know, my music to them, and then we do a sort of collaboration like this online. And I'd say, okay, here's the guitar part I played in. Now what will you do? And you know, we'd sort of talk about it, and it really made me realize that this is totally possible. That you can do this remotely. I think loads of, you know, my colleagues who do what I do have done this. You know, some I've seen really crazy ones. I mean, some people have recorded every single player of the orchestra in their own room and then pieced it all together. Now, look, no one wants to think that there's a future where we won't be able to get back into the room with people for whatever it is, whether it's to go for a drink or whether it's to play in a band or play in an orchestra. You know, we're all obviously willing for that, or a version of that, to return. But I think it's certainly heartening that we can, you know, that film music, TV music can continue with technology and with patience and with knowing what time zone you're in and what time zone other people are in. I mean, it was a sort of fascinating sort of lesson in that, and as well as, you know, the music, recording the music, but also the collaboration with the filmmakers and playing the ideas to them and trying to make them feel comfortable with the ideas. I mean, again, ideally you'd be in a room with someone and you'd look them in the eye, because often it's those sort of little nuances that tell you more about what people think about things than a you know, a grand gesture. But you know, we got through it, and I think it's I think everyone feels sort of very happy about the film. I just hoping it comes out in a month or 6 weeks or whatever it is.
Definitely. And, you know, I'd be remiss. I know you have that film on the way, that's next up. But I know that I understand that you are still in the midst, unless you've already completed it, you're still in the midst of Trees of Peace, I understand. Unless that's already concluded.
So Trees of Peace, I actually concluded. So that was you see, such a different movie to Nobody. You know, one of the things I you know, that makes me happy to sort of wake up and come to the studio is when, you know, there's variety in my job, and that I don't feel like I'm just doing, oh, here's another action film or here's another comedy film. I mean, there are some composers who I obviously enjoy being, you know, a comedy guy or action guy or whatever. And I think that's great, but I think I benefit from sort of moving around a little bit and, exploring different kinds of genres. And so Nobody was, it's classed as an action film. I'm sure you've all seen the trailer. It's, there's some badass stuff in there, but there's some thoughtfulness as well. I mean, I think you can see in Bob Odenkirk's eyes, just even within the trailer. There's a man there's something going on. It's not just like crash bang wallop. There's some crash bang wallop, there's for sure, but there's also some, there's a man who's kind of dealing with stuff. And that's always got an appeal to me in a if I'm scoring an action film, that there's some depth to it. If it's just relentless, balls to the wall action, I find it hard to kind of navigate my way into that, because I'm thinking, well, okay, that's high energy, but where's the sort of human aspect? So what was great about Nobody for me is that even though it ticks all those boxes, and the producers who made John Wick, so I think there's an anticipation for a lot of what the film might be, but I think it also has some unexpected turns and some unexpected qualities, and some thoughtfulness, which I hope I've played a part into that. But Trees of Peace is a very, very, very different beast. It's about the Rwandan genocide. It's set entirely inside one room for the entire film. So there's this incredible sense of claustrophobia. These four women who are basically hiding, for their lives, really. I mean, the risk of being out of this room would be almost certain death. So it's such a, there's no action really in the sense that something like Nobody has, or Greenland, or The Town, or Jason Bourne. It's really a drama, but with a sort of terrifying subject matter. And again, when I was asked about it, I mean, it's a very small film in terms of budget, and it's no fancy studio behind or anything like that. But it had a lot of soul and integrity. A brilliant first-time director, and it just, it made me feel like, cool. This is something a little bit different. Again, it's still, I'm still coming to that party. It's the same bloke, still Dave Buckley, but it was a chance to sort of mingle with different guests at the party, as it were.
Awesome stuff. So even outside of Trees of Peace, I know in terms of having a slate of work, oftentimes, you're able to announce perhaps, some things that are up on tap next, or maybe you aren't. Either way, are you able to comment on, some projects that that you're excited to, step into now that you concluded Trees of Peace, or are you still kind of like tight-lipped on what you can say that you're working on now?
No, there's a few things I can say. I'm literally at the moment just starting it's a first for me. It's a natural history documentary for Disney Plus, National Geographic. It's called In the Womb. And it follows four animals and the sort of gestation period of their babies inside them. It's early days. I've only just begun it, but from what I understand, it's going to be absolutely stunning photography of these embryos as they grow. I mean, I've seen this like little elephant, this baby elephant, and even pictures of this with its trunk forming, and it's just, it's sort of totally magical and almost otherworldly. So that's something that's sort of occupying my time as of the beginning of this year. Then I go back to doing sort of two TV shows, which are almost sort of old friends. Or one of The Good Fight, which is the successor to The Good Wife, will recommence, I guess, in 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe a little longer, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. they were waiting before they started writing the show to find out what the outcome of the presidential election was. It feels like perhaps only today does one really know what the outcome of the presidential election was. So that's, The Good Wife, I did 7 seasons of that show. This is the 5th season of The Good Fight. So it's 12 years involved in that that universe, which is feels like quite a sort of, it's sort of hard to imagine I'll ever find another sort of collaboration like that in this business, something that would last for that long. I feel very privileged, actually. And there's a show, the same people who make The Good Fight, there's another show that they're doing called Evil, which is it's on CBS, and I think it's really good. It's all about it's kind of science religion. There's a horror element. It's all. I mean, an example would be: is someone actually possessed by some demonic force, or are they just insane? And there's different sort of perspectives on that. But it's done. It's quite a sort of clever show in that regard. And then there is there's a British Netflix show that I'm doing in the summer, which I don't know too much about at the moment, other than the fact that I'm doing it. And then there was a movie that was all lined up to go. They were, in fact, supposed to start shooting it now, called Kandahar. Again with Gerald Butler, who seems to be my seems to be wherever I go at the moment. Well, actually, I was going to say he follows me around. It's more like I follow him around. But I'm not sure what's happening with that. I think everything's tricky now with COVID, so we'll have to see. I mean, to be honest, I think I've listed 3 or 4 projects. I consider myself extremely lucky that given the times in which we are living, that I've got I can actually say that I've got anything on the go, because obviously it ain't easy. So I'm lucky that these things are there for me. And there's one other thing, but that's one I should remain tight-lipped on about, because apparently it's going through approval process. So I wouldn't want to jinx it. But actually, it looks like a really fun one. And if we do what I've been talking to the guy whose project it is, if we do what we're going to do, what we think we want to do, it's going to be a sort of. I mean, it's not going to be a hip hop score, but it's going to sort of infuse hip hop elements, kind of dirty. Sort of slightly rugged and raw kind of sounds. And again, I like the sound of it. I've been listening, actually, since I've been talking about it, I've been listening to endless amounts of hip hop music, which is fine until one of my children walks into the room. And it's like, Daddy, what does that word mean? It's like, never mind about that. I'm never going to, like, oust Jay-Z. I'm not trying to do that, but it just broadens my horizons a little bit. I mean, I like the idea of like adding, things that I like doing, bring in some hip hop elements and see kind of what comes out at the other end. It just seems, I like that evolution, and it by doing something like that, it of course it means that you lessen the risk of just repeating yourself, which is obviously not what one.
Well, I have to ask, man, what are you listening to specifically? I know you brought up the name drop Jay-Z, but what specifically are you listening to?
Well, I've got my Spotify list here. Where we go. Can you still see me? Can you still see me, or have I disappeared?
No, I can see you.
Okay, so there's some obvious ones here: Wu-Tang Clan, Cypress Hill, Notorious Big, Souls of Mischief, Nas, Naughty by Nature, A Tribe Called Quest, Gangstar, The Far Side, Lil Wayne, Black Sheep, Snoop Dogg, Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, Outkast, Audio 2, Tupac.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah. So there's about 100 songs in there.
Awesome stuff. Well, David, I'm gonna cut it off there. Thank you so much for talking about Nobody, and talking about how everything came together in terms of what you've had an opportunity to do thus far in your career. Before I let you go, can you tell folks where they can find you? I know you were talking about this a bit off stage, but tell if folks want to look into some of the stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm not a big social media guy, but I've got a website, www.davidbuckleymusic.com, and that's got a fair bit of it's got some of my music on there. In fact, I need to update that, and I probably will. I'll put a few things from Nobody on there soon. I probably can't quite put them on yet because the film hasn't been released and all that kind of stuff. But there's some music on there, sort of my bio, different projects I've done. I wish I were better at social media. I'm not, but that's the best I've got for now. So that'll give you a kind of overview of what I'm doing. And maybe my New Year's resolution would be to be a bit better at updating it.
Fair enough. Well, like I said, thanks again for coming on the show all the way from Europe. I know the logistics were a little insane with the time zones and the time difference, but appreciate it anyway. I'm your host, Brandon Choi, guys. Thanks so much for watching. You can find us on Facebook, which you are seeing now live stream. However, you can also find us on YouTube for our encore episodes of these live streams. You can also find us on Twitter at Move and Shake UNLTD, or Instagram at Movers Shakers Unlimited. And of course, you can find me, Brandon Choi ENT, on Twitter, and Brandon Choi _ENT on Instagram. Again, thanks so much for watching. Be safe out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.